The theater of power is never static. It is a shifting mosaic of mandates, precedents, and the iron will of those who seek to bend the architecture of the state to their vision. For decades, the global order was built on the seamless flow of capital, a borderless machine where the merchant was king and the tariff was a relic of a primitive past. But that machine is fracturing. We are witnessing the sunrise of a new era, the era of the fortress state. In the hallowed halls of the Supreme Court, a battle has just been waged that is less about the price of steel and more about the soul of the executive branch. It is a classic separation of powers struggle, a high-stakes chess match between the robes of the judiciary and the pen of the president. At the center of this storm sits a 6-3 decision that on the surface appears to be a stinging rebuke of Donald Trump's sweeping reciprocal tariffs. The highest court in the land has spoken. The Constitution grants Congress, not the president, the sovereign power to tax and regulate commerce. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the lever the administration pulled to bypass the legislature, was found wanting. It was not the blank check the White House believed it to be. To the casual observer, this is a defeat. A wall has been hit. A presidential ambition has been checked by the weight of the law. But in the shadows of this ruling lies a much more potent reality. While the majority closed a door, a single dissent penned by Justice Brett Kavanaugh has provided the president with something far more valuable than a temporary victory. He has provided a roadmap. Listen closely to the echoes of the courtroom. While Trump publicly lashed out at the majority as fools and lapdogs, his private calculus shifted the moment he read the dissent. "I'm so proud of him," the president remarked, a phrase that carries the weight of a strategic alliance. Kavanaugh did not merely disagree. He theorized. He did not just dissent. He architected a new path forward. He looked at the vast electrical system of American trade law and realized that while the court had flipped the fastest switch, the power grid remained fully intact. This is the beginning of Act Two in the Great Tariff Project. It is a pivot from the blunt force of a single executive decree to the surgical precision of fragmented statutory warfare. The dream of a 10% or 15% universal global tariff is not dead. It is simply being rerouted through the labyrinth of the Trade Act of 1974 and the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. The objective remains the same, only the trajectory has changed. We are no longer talking about a simple tax on goods. We are talking about the weaponization of the balance of payments. Under Section 122, the president holds a temporary but devastating blade, the power to impose 15% tariffs for 150 days to correct a national economic imbalance. It is a ticking clock, a short-term shock to the global system designed to force concessions before the sand runs out. But the strategy goes deeper into the noir of geopolitical maneuvering. To achieve the permanence the administration craves, they will look to the ghosts of the Cold War Section 232. This is the national security gambit. By framing the import of everything from semiconductors to basic aluminum as a threat to the very survival of the republic, the executive branch can bypass the traditional constraints of trade law. It requires an investigation, a paper trail, a Commerce Department willing to sign off on the existential necessity of protectionism. It is a process of slow motion escalation. Then there is Section 301, the bludgeon against unreasonable foreign practices. It is a tool of pure leverage, allowing the United States to act as judge, jury, and executioner in trade disputes, provided the investigation fits the narrative of a burdened American commerce. Justice Kavanaugh did not just cite these laws, he signaled their viability. He suggested that these statutes might justify most, if not all, of the tariffs the president desires. In doing so, he has transformed a judicial setback, into a tactical manual for the expansion of executive trade power. The court hasn't stopped the storm. They have merely instructed the president on how to build a more resilient lightning rod. The world is watching and the markets are trembling. They see a president who is not discouraged by the rule of law, but energized by the discovery of its loopholes. If the administration follows this roadmap, the reciprocal tariff will not arrive as a single massive wave, but as a series of calculated, overlapping surges. National security findings here, balance of payment declarations there, a fragmented, multifaceted siege on the globalist status quo. The architecture of the global marketplace was once a monolith, a singular vision of efficiency and interdependence. But that monolith is being dismantled piece by piece by the very hands that helped build it. The Supreme Court's ruling, while framed as a restoration of congressional authority, has inadvertently created a new species of executive trade power, one that is more fragmented, more complex, and ultimately more difficult challenge. By forcing the president to rely on a mosaic of specific statutes rather than a single emergency act, the court has essentially instructed the White House to build a more sophisticated, legally insulated machine for protectionism. Imagine the strategic simulation. In the West Wing, the advisors are no longer looking for a master switch. Instead, they are studying the roadmap sketched by Justice Kavanaugh with the intensity of a general planning a multi-front campaign. They see a world where trade is no longer a matter of economics, but a theater of national security. Every shipment of grain, every crate of microchips, every coil of steel becomes a potential vulnerability in the architecture of the state. Under Section 232, the definition of national security is a canvas broad enough to encompass almost any industrial sector. It is the ultimate Machiavellian tool, a policy of economic isolation justified as an act of existential survival. This is the unraveling of the post-Cold War consensus. For decades, the mantra was that trade prevents conflict, that if countries were bound by the golden handcuffs of commerce, the drums of war would remain silent. But the new doctrine suggests the opposite, that interdependence is a liability, a clandestine weakness exploited by rivals. The president's obsession with tariffs is not merely a populist impulse. It is a calculated attempt to reclaim American hegemony by decoupling from a global system that he perceives as a rigged game. The historical parallels are impossible to ignore. We are reminded of the mercantilist empires of the 17th century, where trade was a zero-sum game and the wealth of one nation was measured by the extraction of value from another. We see echoes of the Roman Empire's late-stage attempts to fortify its borders through economic dictates as its administrative grip began to slip. Like those ancient powers, the modern executive is attempting to use the leverage of the fortress state to dictate terms to a world that has grown increasingly defiant. But there is a darker subtext to this legal maneuvering. By following Kavanaugh's roadmap, the administration is effectively bypassing the spirit of the separation of powers while adhering to its letter. If the president can achieve 90% of his goals through a series of findings and investigations conducted by his own departments, then the congressional check on his power becomes a cosmetic formality. The architecture of ego finds its foundation in the very laws designed to limit it. The 150-day limit of the Trade Act of 1974 is not a barrier. It is a recurring deadline for a permanent crisis. The periodic reviews of Section 301 are not safeguards, they are opportunities for escalation. In this strategic simulation, the president does not need Congress to grant him power. He only needs the judiciary to tell him which shadows to move through. As the global markets react to the news of a potential 15% universal tariff, the reality of this Act 2 begins to set in. This is not a temporary disruption. It is the beginning of a structural shift in how the United States interacts with the world. The era of the open sea is ending, replaced by a world of economic checkpoints and sovereign walls. The president's pride in Justice Kavanaugh is not just a personal sentiment. It is a recognition of a shared vision, a vision where the executive is the ultimate arbiter of the nation's economic destiny. The Great Tariff Project is no longer a campaign promise or a rhetorical flourish. It is a documented strategy blessed by a dissent that carries the weight of a future majority. The roadmap is clear. The statutes are identified. The investigations are being prepared. The fastest switch may have been flipped off, but the lights of the globalist era are flickering, and the man in the Oval Office is reaching for the entire electrical system. We are entering a period of high-stakes geopolitical friction where the rule of law is used as a blueprint for the expansion of power. The simulation is no longer a theory. It is the new reality of the American state. The question is no longer if the tariffs will return, but how many different names they will wear when they arrive.